Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is episode number 65 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Jason Romano. It is great to have you here listening on the program today. As always, you can subscribe and download this podcast on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. And all of our content, of course, is at sportspectrum.com, where you can become a member and partner with us for just $36 for 1 year. Tax deductible, $36 gets you into the Sports Spectrum family. You get 4 of our magazines, a quarterly magazine with really great content in it. And you also get access to 30 plus years of Sports Spectrum content going back to 1985. So join us, become a partner, $36. Go to sportspectrum.com, click the join button, and you become a member. And it's a great gift. It actually is. If you get this before Christmas, you can subscribe and give this as a stocking stuffer or a gift to your church or to your kids or your grandkids or to your youth group. Really great idea. Partner with us, $36 a year over at sportspectrum.com. Today's guest is ESPN football analyst, former NFL quarterback Brock Huard. Now, Brock does something very similar to what we do on our podcast. He hosts a faith and sports podcast. It's called Above and Beyond, and they just finished season 1, and it is a fantastic listen on the stories of the intersection of sports and faith. Brock does a wonderful job doing interviews and really getting to the heart of some of these stories that a lot of these big-name athletes are going through. And we've had a few of the same athletes that Brock has had on this podcast, including Matt Hasselbeck, who was featured back in episode 2 of the Sports Spectrum podcast. But Brock is a very unique man because he is literally living in both worlds, the media world, the sports world of ESPN, and the radio world, the sports radio world, as a host of Brock and Salk on 710 ESPN in Seattle. But he's also doing this podcast, and he's living in a ministry world as well, telling these stories of faith, very unashamed, unabashed about who he is as a believer in Christ. Brock, of course, played in the NFL for 6 seasons with Seattle and Indianapolis. He backed up Peyton Manning for a couple of seasons, which is pretty cool. He was selected in the 3rd round of the 1999 draft by the Seahawks out of the University of Washington. His high school career, he was the Gatorade High School Football Player of the Year in 1995. Brock is married to Molly and has 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. And again, is doing really great things in the media world, hosting, analyst work, studio work. So he's doing some wonderful things. And recently he was in Bristol, Connecticut, which is where I reside. And we went to a hotel room and sat down and had a really powerful conversation on matters of faith and sports. And I really think you guys will enjoy this episode. So let's get right to it. Episode number 65, ESPN football analyst and former NFL quarterback, Brock Huard. It is great to have Brock here on the podcast.
They say that radio is the theater of the mind. So if you call a studio one with 2 beds in it, then you know what, we'll roll with it.
And it's a podcast, so it's really the theater of the mind.
Hotel room.
Brock, welcome to the podcast, studio. Man.
This is so cool.
Yeah,
this is so neat. We were just praying before we started and thinking, Jason, about how our paths cross.
Yeah.
And I remember way back when, I don't think I've ever told you this, Matt Hasselbeck's like, oh, you got to talk to Jason, man. You got to talk to him. Because I was saying to him, like, I think Lord's opening these podcast doors for me in a faith deal. He's like, oh, you got to chat with Jason. He's doing the same thing. And yeah, look at this. Like a year plus later, here we are.
I know, it's amazing. And Hasselbeck was on our 2nd episode of the podcast. He was your first guest, right?
Yeah.
So how ironic is that, right? We both got to hear different stories from Matt.
Cool.
It's pretty great. So let's talk about you for a moment. You've achieved a ton of success in your life. High school quarterback, lots of success there. College quarterback, lots of success. You make it to the NFL. Obviously, an awesome achievement in its own right. Doing well now in broadcasting. So before we get to all of that, because there's a lot there, spiritually there's a lot there as well. Take us to the moment. Let's start with when you said yes to Christ, when your faith walk began.
Yeah, that was junior high for me, thankfully. And that was a man named Scott Sears, who's a youth pastor at Bethany Baptist Church in Puyallup, who looked at me in our home. So we are the poor man Manning's family. So there's 3 boys. I'm the middle, like Peyton, who I played with in Indy for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's a little different because Cooper, the oldest, was the non-NFL guy, but my oldest brother, Damon, went and played 12 years in the NFL.
Yes, he did. Backed
up Marino and Brady. He's got a couple Super Bowl rings and had a remarkable career. And then little brother Luke is kind of like our Cooper. Damon, I guess, would be Eli in this way. But Luke, who's a coach and is an unbelievably witty, smart, driven, everybody life of the party guy, kind of like Cooper is in the Manning family. So we're the poor man's Manning family and just a family of achievers, the son of a high school coach, just competitive as all get out. And Scott came into my life and said, "You're going to need Christ."
He bluntly said it.
Yeah, he just saw me from afar and, just kind of poured into me and through friends and relationships. And I dabbled with church, and we grew up in a really moral, treat people the right way home. My dad was the high school coach, state champion coach, Hall of Fame coach in town, a kind of a big deal in our community outside of Seattle, and really treated people incredibly well. Is beloved, in our little small hometown that's grown into a bigger town now. But Scott said, I think way back then, I can tell that. And I think he also knew that he could see something a little different in me than maybe the rest of my family. And I was pursuing at that time a young lady that came from a very strong Christian home that was connected at Bethany Baptist Church. And maybe in some ways of protecting her as well, there was hey, why don't you reach out to this knucklehead kid, see where he's at in his life. And it was pretty soon thereafter. It didn't take me long to realize how flawed I was, how imperfect I was. I was an unbelievably intense, emotional, borderline irrational guy, and it didn't, even at that age, kind of an old soul, that I could figure out what I wasn't and what I really needed, and I needed a saving grace, and made that commitment and got saved in my freshman year.
So I come from a family of 3 brothers as well. I don't even know if you know that.
Yep.
I'm the oldest, but my middle brother Chris was the first in our family to be saved. So I wonder for you, I remember what that dynamic was like, because I don't know what it was like with your family, but my brother, when he became a Christian, we all thought he was nuts. We came from this sort of, like you said, moral home, grew up Catholic, but went to church occasionally, didn't know relationship. We knew religion, right? We all looked at him like he was kind of nuts when he first became a Christian, and I still to this day am grateful because he's the one that shared Christ with me. Mm-hmm. For you, what was that like, having 2 brothers, your family? Were you the first in your family? How did that kind of dynamic work?
I think so. And then Damon, older brother, had people point into his life. Mm-hmm. That was probably also in some ways the start, if you really do look at the timeline, because Bethany Baptist there, the pastor's son, Brandon Bakke, who ended up playing at Fresno State, really good friends with Trent Dilfer. What a small world.
Yeah, exactly.
Trent became a teammate and everything else. Yeah, and Brandon and the church kind of knocked at Damon's door, and he was looking at it, and it kind of got me in the door. And then, my little brother was just on fire in high school. He got saved, and some of his friends that he helped convert are now pastors today. And so, I would say it was pretty neat. My parents now go to Bible study fellowship.
Wow,
my dad would come to all of my events. I got a chance then at a young age, just through sports, an opportunity to speak at churches and baccalaureates and funerals, and Dad would come, and man, he'd be in tears and just so moved. And they're close and they're searching, and my mom is saved. My dad is searching, but to see them now at Bible study fellowship is just a gift and blessing.
That's a step in the right direction. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
Just to even step foot in something like that is,
and
it takes a lot of courage.
It does, Jason. There's something I think about our small little conservative town we grew up in, smaller, that people weren't afraid to, also look at my dad. I can think of Dave Requay, an old PE teacher, a wrestling coach, that was just on fire, and I could see that. And he didn't mind, knocking on my dad's heart, like, Mike, there's more to this than coaching, and looking back at those years that were so timid today at times in our society, and we're so afraid, and I don't know, should I don't want to offend, I don't want to hurt, and maybe there was some beauty way back when, and looking at, those people that did in some ways, just, hey, approach me and come into our family's life. And it certainly has, been an amazing road since.
That's great. We're talking to Brock Huard here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You go to college and you play your ball at Washington, University of Washington. And there's a story that I heard on your podcast, Above and Beyond, which I highly recommend as people who are listening to this are looking for other podcasts. But you share a story of how your faith in being so open as a believer in Christ almost, I don't want to say backfired, but it kind of took it kind of came back into your face a little bit in an injury that happened. Take us to that moment in college and that time.
Oh, you mean a little persecution?
Just a little bit. Hey, the Bible says we're going to go through it, right?
Yeah, we better. And if we're walking and we're not getting and facing any of that,
yes,
we better dig into our walk or our accountability and those that love us and maybe challenge us a little bit. But yeah, I was very open about my faith. Had a really neat group of teammates. Had a pastor on campus, Mike Gunn from Athletes in Action, that was just instrumental in my life. Scott married us. Mike Gunn spoke at our wedding.
Yep.
He's in ministry today around the world. Just an amazing guy. And thankful for all of them to be some of my backbone and support because, I got injured against Nebraska. Grant Wistrom had fallen on my ankle, and I had hurt my ankle, and it was my first significant injury really in my life through high school, and that was, I guess, my second year of playing in college. And I just couldn't stand on my foot. I mean, I went back and tried to tape it up, brace it up. This doctor tried to give me a lot of pills, which I wasn't comfortable because I'd never done that in my life. And I just couldn't go. I couldn't go. And we were top 5 game in the country. They ended up winning the national title that year. And I had a teammate, and I'm pretty sure I know who it was, that had written, had highlighted in the newspaper article, slightly sprained ankle. And then he had written, Philippians 4:13, if you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, ? Basically, then why can't you play on a sprained ankle?
Wow.
And it was just blatant, man. It was just right in my locker, just highlighted for all to see. Wow. Philippians 4:13, ? Really? You tell us about your faith, you live this faith, talk about this faith, put it on your wristband, you do all this, and you can't play with a sprained ankle. And that was hard, man. Yeah.
What did you learn from that?
I had to walk out of the locker room and have some quiet time. Probably not too dissimilar to Jesus when he had to leave his feedings and his miracles and just kind of like, oh man, this is crazy, and just have some peace and have some tears and have some pain and have some heartache and have some crying out to the Lord of just what do you want me to do here, And what do you want me to say? And how am I going to defend myself and ultimately just defend him? Ultimately I'm not going to back down in my faith. And ultimately I talked to that teammate. And ultimately I did everything in my power to get back and get to playing. But yeah, that was, from a persecution or hardship standpoint with teammates at 19 years of age, that was a hard pill to swallow at the moment, but one of those faith building times, no doubt.
Absolutely. Now you have a great career in college. You're selected in the 3rd round of the '99 draft by the Seahawks, and you come into a team with some pretty influential people in your life at the time, with like John Kitnas of the world and Matt Hasselbeck. What did that mean, kind of getting into the NFL as a young Christian, trying to navigate the life of being a professional and also being a believer in Christ?
Well, it's meant everything. That's my testimony. We each have our testimony, and I love yours, and eventually you will be on my podcast. And I love what you're doing. I love what you did at ESPN here, and
thank you.
And that your heart and you're pursuing, your heart's desire here, and each of us have a different testimony. Yours is built out of pain and hardship and challenges that I never endured in my upbringing, and some of those scars, I'm sure. Mine, grew up with people pleasing, son of a coach and achieve and just work and all of that has its own cross to bear in some ways. And without people, without Scott Sears and without Mike Gunn and without, the teammates that I had in Seattle and Indy and the chaplains and Carl Payne and Eric Simpson, and I could go on and on. That's my testimony. And to this day it is I have a small men's group, and Steve and Graham and Steve, and the 4 of us who meet at 5:30 at Tolly's Coffee on Wednesday mornings, because our lives are crazy and there's no way we would find any other time to meet other than commit to that time at 5:30 on Wednesday mornings. That I have to. I have to, and so yes, to walk into a locker room with Todd Peterson and John Kitna and Carl Payne, the chaplain, and to just have meat and potatoes, and to room with John, who is as genuine and as real, whose walk was so authentic in the face of all of that and unbelievable adversity that he fought. It's life-changing, it's life-building, and that's my testimony.
What about being a quarterback, though, being friends with these guys, but also competing, in essence, for a job that, only one person can get? How is the dynamics there of trying to be a believer? It's John Kitna, right?
Sure.
And you want to be the starting quarterback. You're drafted in the 3rd round, and yet he's your buddy and you're pouring into him, but you're still trying to compete and, in essence, beat him for a position.
It was phenomenal. I mean, it was
interesting. Phenomenal. Huh?
It really was. It was phenomenal. We roomed together. There was no
friction or anything.
No, there was no bitters. You get the opportunity, wish you the best, going to help you, going to encourage you, and you want to win. I mean, at the pro level, you want to win. Yeah. And you know what? More than likely, you're going to get your opportunity. I think in the NFL in 2017, 50% of the quarterbacks have gotten hurt. And it wasn't that much different back then. You're going to get your opportunity. And ultimately, in year 2, he got demoted. I got my opportunity, and he and his wife were the most unbelievable. And Jen Kitna, his wife, and my wife are the closest of friends to this day. And she wrote me a letter with like a care package before my first start. I mean, it was incredible. And then take it a step further, Jason, after John leaves, then who comes in? Well, then comes Matt. Oh, and then comes Jim Zorn, the QB coach. Oh, and how about Trent Dilfer? How about that room?
Wow.
How about that room?
Yeah.
How about the room of Trent, Matt, me, and Jim Zorn?
Wow.
And, just ordained. It was unbelievable. Hyper competitive, yes.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because I know Trent and I know Matt.
And bust each other's chops, yes. Yeah. And Jim Zorn stirred up, yes. And intense, and sometimes pounding the table and say, sure, all of that. Yeah. But when it boiled down to it, when you left the building or you left the practice field and the competition, it was amazing. I mean, we always still talk about it, and we will to the day we die. Like, can you believe we had that year together?
Wow.
That room.
1 year.
Yeah. And Jim Zorn, one of our first meetings saying, guys, there's something you do take with you in heaven. You know that, right? Like before first install of anything, you don't buy that. You take something to, what are you talking about, Jim? Seriously, think about it. You take something with you, and you take your name because it's written in the book of life.
Wow.
Right? And it was
that. It's like the last thing you're expecting in a quarterback meeting, right?
That was right. And that was the start of it. Wow. An incredible friendship still to this day. Matt was on my podcast. Jim's on my podcast. Trent's going to be on my podcast. Yes. And those enduring relationships. Yeah. So that's what cuts through. That's what cuts through a competitive, crazy professional business there.
Can that, you can say, yes, that can happen with like-minded believers in Christ.
Yes.
But can that happen if you're not all like-minded?
No.
It's hard, right?
Very hard. And I'm sure
because you were on teams with obviously players that weren't believers or quarterbacks.
Oh,
too.
Much more challenging. Yeah. And there you're just trying to command respect, and you're and much like in my broadcast world now, where I'm surrounded by 90% of non-believers, yes. Like you were when you worked at ESPN. You're just trying to be light.
Yeah.
You're trying to just command, not command, but you're just trying to just reflect that light of grace and faith and humility and what that can look like, and hopefully something different. I mean, you saw it, did you not, with all the different analysts that came in through all the years?
Yes, of course.
Right? We're all hyper competitive.
Very much so.
And
everybody wanted somebody else's job. Why can I be, why am I not the main guy? Why am I the second guy or the fifth guy? They all wanted to, they felt like they were qualified or had done enough to be a certain level.
But I'm going to imagine Tony Dungy, when you were around him, because I know you've quoted him and talked about him in your sermons and different times. I'm going to guess that he struck a little different chord, competitively and otherwise around others, just as he did for me for 2 years.
Listen, the day Tony Dungy came changed my life at ESPN, because he didn't care about Tony Dungy, and he never knew me, but he said, "Tell me about you, Jason." And that changed it. It just changed. I started sharing things, and I've shared this testimony a million times, but he started sharing things with me and started asking me questions about how I'm being a light at ESPN. And I'm like, wait a minute here. I'm trying to walk Tony Dungy around to promote his book, to be on ESPN, Sports Center, Mike and Mike, all these other shows, and he doesn't care about that. He just wants to get to know me, even in that couple hours that he spent with me.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Did you see others in your time around some of the other Christian folks in the building? Could you tell, because I think you bring in a good question, and I loved, there was one of our podcasts this year that I got into, can you be competitive?
Yeah.
Right? How can you be a Christian? And Erwin McManus is a guy I love out of L.A.
Yes.
And he had an awesome sermon on that, on just what does it mean to be competitive and be a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I had one of my coworkers who doesn't know the Lord. He'd asked me about that. It was Steve Largent. It was in that podcast that Steve talked about that competitiveness.
Yep.
And can you really walk a Christ-centered life and be ultra competitive too? I mean, in an ultra competitive field that you were around a lot of these guys, did those Christians stand out?
Yeah, they really did. And I can even speak from experience for myself. There was a moment that I was going for this job with a colleague of mine, and I thought, there's no way I'm not going to get this job. I mean, it's locked. I've been doing this a lot longer than that person. I've been doing things that person hasn't done that should qualify me more for the job. I didn't get it. And I had to humble myself. I had to eat a lot of humble pie. I had to go and scream and yell into my pillow to get out the emotions and then come back and say, how can I be the best teammate with you? That was hard. Yep. It was very hard. Yep. But I've also seen it with other people. And yes, the believers do stand out, I think. It took a long time, Brock, to get to find who the believers were that weren't on air. That was hard, especially until probably the social media time when everybody kind of would start to let their guard down through the lens of a social media post or two. Yeah. Before that, you just hope that you had a conversation and somebody mentioned church and then maybe you got an opportunity to talk. But otherwise, it was difficult. I mean, did you find, was it like that for you too? And playing in the NFL? I mean, especially before the social media age?
Football was a little unique in that way.
It was.
And I'm thankful for that.
Because you had a chapel.
But it just exposes everything.
That's true as well.
It is so humbling. There's so much failure. The higher you climb, the harder it is. And it just, it's pretty raw. Yeah. It's pretty raw. And the conversations in locker rooms are pretty raw. Mm-hmm. I remember so vividly one of my Christian teammates, my rookie year, we called him Little Peter, and I loved him. And he held everybody accountable. That if you claim to be Christ, he was going to come alongside, like not to non-believers, right, but to those that really claimed and would wear the WWJD bracelets, right, at the time, and then start to lose their mind and talk about things, and he would just walk right up and he kind of like point to their bracelet, like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm sorry, man. You're right. That was really stupid. I won't do that again." You know, so yeah. No, I think some of the camaraderie, some of the rawness, some of just the failure that comes out in sports, most of that gets pretty exposed.
That's good. Now, you mentioned, and we're going to talk about your disciple group now in a moment, the 5:30 a.m. on Wednesdays and why that's so important. But let's go back to your playing days in the NFL. What did the 5:30 a.m. time that you have now look like then? Where was it? Was it even there?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. It was team studies. It was small groups. It was couples Bible studies. It was PAO. It was some of the richest, just some of the richest, most fertile spiritual ground that my wife and I have ever been planted in. Yeah, and we talk about that to this day. My wife was an athlete. She was a college basketball player. Stalked her, pursued her for many years to convince her to marry me, but it eventually happened.
Got to do what you got to do, right?
Yes, but she, like a lot of athletes, you just get routine. My Golick likes to say it's just we're trained. We're itineraries. What's my itinerary? Yeah, and we functioned really well young in our marriage with that kind of structure. We got married our last year of college. Wow. Yes, right. Our last semester of college, we got married right before the NFL, and then to have Jen Kitna and to have Sonny Weiner and to have Chuck and Barb Snyder, who are our family kind of Bible study built in with the team, was amazing, amazing. So that is my testimony. There is no doubt about it. I love to say to the church groups that I get the chance to speak at, or small groups, like, think about it. In our city of Seattle with the 12s, you see 12 everywhere. Everywhere. And to me, when I see 12, I get this little smile on my face because I just think of the 12 disciples. Yes. That he needed 12 knuckleheads. Not one, not two, 12. Yeah. And he needed them from all walks and all backgrounds, and little Peter and all of them, right? Who brought there. Some were doubts, some were strong, some were lovers, some were haters. But he needed all 12 together. And I am no different. It's why I've always been a team sport guy. That's in my DNA as the son of a coach. And no, I know that there's just no doubt that, the richest, deepest roots were built there in relationship with others in those accountability groups.
Now, your life now is a little different, a lot different than your playing days. You do radio, you do TV, you do color, you do games, you do radio hosting in the morning, you do studio work, podcast. Most don't get to delve into all these broadcasting areas like you're in right now. And I think I'm curious from let's talk broadcasting side first. So faith we'll put to the side for a minute and just say preparing and handling and doing all of those different things. How do you juggle those? That's not easy. I don't know how I juggle one podcast, and you're doing podcasts and radio and shows and games, NFL, college. Talk about that.
Yeah, talk to me in a few years. So, it stretches the margins. It's really the football seasons where it's just chaos. It's total chaos of just doing a morning show every day and traveling every weekend, and 3 kids and my poor wife. And thankfully, we have a wonderful church. Thankfully, we've got a young gal that lives with us that we're pouring into, and she pours into our kids.
That's
and
great.
It's just, we can make it work during the season. And then we take a little breath out of season and reconvene and see how we're going to make it all work moving forward. But these are doors that he's opened. And I never, ever, ever imagined you and I would ever be in a hotel room doing any of this. Right. I was going to be a doctor, and then football happened, and then I was in real estate development, and media happened, and those just doors opened. I could, if you would have told me in college, like, oh, you're going to be a sports radio, you're crazy.
Yeah.
There is no chance. I am not a blowhard. I am not any of that stuff. I'm not this big personality. There's no way. And sure enough, this door opened, and that door opened, and that door opened, and that really is how so many of those kind of ventures you talked about have opened.
Let's talk about the spiritual side now of that, because that's chaos from August until February, we'll say. That's chaos. Talk about family dynamic, talk about spiritual groundedness there and staying connected to Jesus. Like, what does that look like in season? We'll talk about out of season in a moment.
Well, I think I try to marry them together, but there is no doubt. And one of my small group buddies, Steve Lemry, who is one of the brightest, most Mensa men I've ever met in my life. He built his whole backyard by himself.
Of course.
That's his pool. That's his outdoor living space. That's his sport court. That's all of it and leveled it. Of course you did. Because I can't do any of that. None of it. None of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
But he doesn't like the word intentional. We talk about this a bunch. He just, because, and I think it's the word I think it's the fact that it starts with an I. He is so humble. He just is so thought provoking. He's just one of those men that I hope all of us have in our lives. It just provokes thought in your mind. Like, you leave a meeting with him or a session with him or an accountability group with him or a work situation, and you're just like, gosh, you just think about what he says. And he doesn't like intentional, and I get it. He likes purposeful. And that really is the word I would use.
It's a good word. I like intentional. I use that a lot when I speak and share, because I believe we should always be intentional but never forceful with our faith. That's the word I use.
Yes.
But maybe purposeful might be a better word.
And it's just, in some degrees it's semantics, but in some degrees it's not. Intentional starts with an I. Like, I'm going to intentionally do this. No, you're not. Yeah. You're going to really follow the will of the Lord and get on your knees and see what He purposely wants for you. And so we have kind of, one of us says that we all kind of smile, and he smiles with Joe. I mean, purposeful. So, but I have to be, in order to balance it, there has to be incredible purpose. And there's got to be a lot of no's to everything outside of my family. There's got to be an incredible commitment to my wife. There's got to be a date night every Tuesday night during the season, no matter what's going on. There's got to be the ability to say no and maybe not please some people because I can't do this for you. And I'm sorry, I just can't do that for you because my wife and my family is going to come first and foremost.
That's hard for Christians because we're called to serve.
Yes, it is.
So saying no, talk about how that's
because saying yes to something is saying no to your family.
Yeah,
how about that?
How about quoting that?
How about that wisdom?
There's a quote shop right there.
Every once in a while, maybe my wife has to remind me of that. That when you say yes to something outside the home, now if you're like-minded and you know what I have found. Some of those Tuesday night date nights, she's right there beside me at a speaking event.
So it's an opportunity to kind of do life together that way.
It's exactly right.
It's exactly right.
In fact, we had some of the really most just kind of enduring encouraging moments this season at that, where she came with me to speak.
Yeah.
Or we had this other fundraiser, this function for this amazing gal doing amazing work in our market, the Legacy Institute, and Molly was up there sharing, and I don't think I've ever been more proud to just kind of hear her. So be purposeful. If you want to say intentional, that's fine, but be purposeful in that.
I don't think I'm ever going to use that word again. I think you just completely got it out of my...
I didn't. You can credit Steve.
Steve,
the brilliant one.
Absolutely. Talk about the speaking engagements that you do. So obviously, people who are in the faith world, ministry, having you come and speak, that's a different sort of dynamic. You can be as open as you want about your faith.
Yeah.
Then you go and speak to these other organizations, all doing probably great work or different places, and you have to kind of, or maybe you don't, but I think maybe you have to teeter the line a little bit. How can you be purposeful? I almost said intentional. How can you be purposeful about your faith in a situation in a place like that?
Well, that's another word, but it's pretty simple to me, and that's authentic. And that is really what these podcasts have been.
Yes.
That's what we're doing right now. That's my heart's desire in it. If I can't be authentic, I'm not going to do it. Right? If it's just a function or something that's asking me to do something that's just not, I'm not going to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that ability to say no has been learned. I don't know if my dad's ever said no to anything, because he just he just loves. He's a lover of people. But that's and you're right. It almost sounds like a conflict, because we're here to serve others.
Yes.
But, we're here to serve our wife. We're here to die for our wives. We're here to, for me to die to my accountability group, man, and to be able to be authentic with them and real with them and say, and, we've got a little scale that we keep. And one of the men in my group had got this from Jeff Kemp, actually, way back when.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure Jeff got it from some other wise old man who got it from some other wise old man. And it's probably like, the book of Matthew at the beginning. You go date this all the way back to the very beginning. But, we do this little chart and we rate 1 to 10. How's your walk with the Lord? How is your relationship with your wife? How's your relationship with your kids? And then how's your relationships at work? And we rate them 1 through 10 every Wednesday morning. And we just put that number out there to really say, yep, man, my walk has been horrible. Yep, my wife and I are going through it right now. Yep, my kids, my teenage daughters and sons right now, we're in the fire, and to be able to really authentically put it out there. So, because
guys are wired to sort of put a mask on and say everything's cool, everything's good, right?
Yes, they are.
And that's why it's so important to have this opportunity, right?
Yeah, I just can't say it enough. It's a have to for me. To walk with the Lord, with who He wants me to be, I have to walk with others. I am like Peter and like Thomas and like John and James and the rest of them. Andrew, I'm just, I have to be a teammate. I have to walk alongside. I have to have people hold me accountable. I've got to be willing to, and as I'm getting older, I'm just like crying more as I'm sharing with my guys and my buddies and just live life with them. Yeah. And you're right. Men don't do that very well.
No, and Christian men don't do that very well. I don't want to just put this as men in general. I mean, even people who are believers and profess a faith in Christ struggle with this. We've seen this in our men's groups in our church about just getting guys to open up with struggles. But when they do, you really see a freedom start to take place. Yep. Would you agree with that?
Oh, there's no doubt. In fact, in 2018, I can't wait for this. It's circled on the calendar, and my 3 buddies have agreed to do it. And we're going to take the table. We asked the coffee shop if we can use the table on this Sunday, and we're going to speak to 600 men.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're going to put the table right on the stage, and we're going to sit there as we do.
And just do like you do on a Wednesday morning.
We're going to do it.
Wow.
Because I don't know how many men, Christian men or other men, really even know what that looks like.
Yeah.
The folks that have asked me, Higher Ground is the group that reaches out to these men. They asked me to do this, and I said, really, this was their heart's desire. It's like, what does accountability look like today? Mm-hmm. And for Christian men, what's it look like in their home? And I said, well, if I'm going to do this, can I do this? Can I bring these other 3 that I walk life with? And can we bring our table? And can we? And they're like, yes, yes. That's that authentic message we all need.
Why is it so important to do life with just those 3 or 4? Because I think I'm in a world, especially when I was working at ESPN, where I knew a lot of people. And you sort of say everybody's your buddy or your friend or your connection, even you and I. Like, we're not best friends. We don't really know each other that well. But you have that core four, three or four. Talk about the dynamic of why 3 or 4 is important and not 20 or 40 or 60. And maybe there is some of that too.
I think there is some of that. You know, you get a chance, obviously, with Pro Athletes Outreach, which, man, was so influential in our lives.
Yeah. And
going to those conferences and you know, that's where things deepened with the Kitnas. That's where there were a lot of tears. That's where there was just a lot. That's where the roots went deep. Yeah. So I guess that, you know, if you're a person and I'm not, if you're an extrovert, maybe you are, that can have deep roots with 30 men, God bless you, man. And you're going to just do unbelievable things, you know?
Yeah.
I like to just go deep and build some of those deep roots. Now, having said that, Jason, I have, you know, that small group right now. But when John Kitna comes to town and we go to dinner and it's John and Jen and me and Molly, how you living? Molly, how's Brock treating you? Like, those roots are deep.
And those are real questions. You can't hide those.
No, and he doesn't he doesn't throw jabs, right? I mean, he's coming right in.
Uppercut.
And Matt and Sarah Hasselback come to town and we go out. How's your marriage? How are the kids? And you know, so while I have that current group of men that we're walking life with, when you do develop those deep roots and that tree is rooted deep by the river, man, you have an opportunity to still connect and have relationships that are unique.
Let's talk about criticism. And I say this from your standpoint as a broadcaster who is a believer. And, you know, you're watching these guys and you have to be critical of their performance. The great Jerry Madelon, who you probably know as well as I do from ESPN, formerly of ESPN, used to tell me criticize the performance, not the performer. But for a believer who we're told to love others and not to judge and to love and serve, your job is to be critical of performance on the field. How do you walk that walk in both of those areas?
Gosh, I don't think I've ever been asked that question. Yeah, in all my years, even by producers or directors or anybody, I don't think I have ever been asked that before. And I guess I would say to you, that is a question I asked when I got into radio. Really? Way back when, I asked the general manager, I said, "How am I going to? I'm not wired this way. I'm not a sports radio guy that's going to just rip somebody." He's like, "You don't have to." I said, "I don't know. Most of them kind of do.
Most of them do.
Yeah,
the first takes of the world. That's what their job is.
Yeah. And you know what? And he had said this, and it was through a consultant. He's right, and it's probably Jason, how I've carried it through studio or games or anything or my radio show. And that is, would you be willing to say it to their face?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to have this, what you and I are having right now, face-to-face discussion? You know what? And in the calendar year of 2017, I got criticized more than I ever had in my life. Jim Mora ripped me to shreds, the coach at UCLA.
Yes.
He demeaned me. He demoralized me. He tried to belittle me. It was as personal attack as I have ever gotten in my life, even more than my college teammates. And in that moment, you know what I did? I texted him right away. And I said, "Man, what's the deal? You know, so are you going to be willing to say this to my face?" You know, and we went back and forth and kind of aired it out. And, you know, I felt very comfortable with that exchange and that conversation. And we saw that very differently, because in no means he felt like I was just tearing his kid down and burying one of his players. I said, "Jim, I would say everything I said on the air right to his face. I would say to that player, like, this is the way it works in the NFL. Yeah. Fair or unfair, justified or not, this is how they're going to evaluate you when you're in this position." That's what I said on the broadcast. Yeah. And so I guess just having that integrity to be able to realize, and you know what, many times through the years, those hard critiques have walked back in the door at me. I had a college coach who I had made some pretty strong, not personal, it was just about the play calls. Yeah. And I said, "You're running the ball here. Did you not see what happened to Marshawn Lynch? Like, run the ball." And he didn't. He threw. It was incomplete. And it was a year later. I had that same team, and I could tell it was a little cold in our meeting. And eventually he just couldn't hold. He's like, "You would have really run it again?" And I was like, wow, that was a year.
And it's still stuck with him.
And it's still stuck with him. But you know what? Kind of like with Jim Mora too, I just said, "Coach, yeah, I would have." And that's okay. I didn't personally, attack you. It was just that decision that you had made, and yeah.
So many struggle with the idea. I think from the sports world, they think when you're criticizing their performance that you're criticizing the performer, which is what G-Matt used to tell me all the time to teach these guys when I would mentor him, is like, don't be afraid to criticize the performance and don't ever make it personal.
Yes.
But they still take it personal.
Yeah, they can. Yeah. Sure they can. And, my buddy Matt Hasselbeck this year has gone through it a little bit with an NFL guy that, again, kind of lost it and tried to kind of tear down his personal character. But, yeah, I mean, that's also the responsibility. And you know what always cuts through? It's the same thing that cuts through with Tony Dungy, who I got to play for 2 years, who had to critique players, whether it was even the great Peyton Manning, and he could put the plays up there on Monday that even, a Hall of Famer doesn't execute on. And that is do it with integrity and consistency. And, I've done this job for 10 years. I don't know when the door is going to close and when it's done, but I can look back and say, and with all my radio shows and all the stuff, the 3 hours of talking a day on the radio, I don't think there's anything I regret. And that thought does go through my mind in those moments that, hey, you willing to say this to their face? Because if you're willing to say it to their face, you may have to one day.
Yes.
And more than likely, this crazy media world, as interactive as it is today, you're going to. And when you do, have the integrity to say it to their face.
Well, your job requires you to be out more. It's easy to be a radio host and never go out and cover a game, never see any of these guys, talk to them on the phone maybe. But you're also doing NFL games for ESPN Radio. You're doing college games for ESPN. You're doing your local stuff. I mean, this job is one where you're going to be in front of people and have to talk to them.
Sure, and there have been players. There's a certain Mariner right now that won't look at me and talk to me, and he's very offended by me, and that was simply hey, there's more expected of you. With more you're given, there's more expected, and that really bothered him and his wife. And you know what? It will probably more than likely spring training in 2018 come to a head, and I'll probably go up to him and say, hey, this is, if you're in my position, you would do and say, what you have to do and say, and I stand by that. And this is nothing personal to you, but this is just my job to do and have the integrity to do so.
Go ahead.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I guess, to spin that into our Christian walk too. Yeah. What do you do when you have a friend of yours that isn't walking?
It's hard.
What do you do when you have someone that you
who was walking and is not anymore,
or that is walking and is in church with you and is just saying and treating his wife or his kids or a coworker in a way that that's not righteous? Yeah. What are you saying? Yeah. What are you saying to as John Kidner would say to me, like, are you praying with your wife at night? I mean, are you praying? Are you walking right alongside her? Are you dying to her? And if you've got a friend of yours in a relationship and someone that's seeking and walking with Christ and isn't, what do you say? Do you is it, I'm a broadcaster, right? Yeah. It's my job to analyze. And as we have those relationships, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to say to that friend of yours, that brother of yours, that sister of yours in Christ, like, hey, now, this isn't what you're called to. You're not living to the calling. Yeah.
And that's hard.
Or are you so worried you're going to offend?
That's what I was going to say. Where there's a fear of rejection. There's a fear of being offending to this person. But I think it goes back to what you said about transparency and being authentic. You got to be able to get in somebody's face and tell them and allow and almost give them permission to say, Brock, listen, if I'm messing up, I am giving you permission to come at me and get in my face. And that's when you just take it. You just bring it and say,
that's okay. Beautiful, man. As I told you, I had never thought about that question before. But over the last few years, I've developed some relationships with these coaches, right? So this is my 10th year on the college football road. And there's a number of them that have had stability that I've been in their offices a lot. And over the last few years, I have found myself, I haven't thought about this, but I found myself saying to these men, permission to speak freely? Like, hey, I'm going to take this to a level or place that we don't have to go public with it or anything, but permission to speak freely. And more often than not, it is something like with their team of selfishness on the field or just a really like, I'm not understanding how these two things, you've said this, but this is what I'm not, there's a real disconnect. Permission to speak freely. And you know what every one of them says? Of course. And then even if it's hard, like, it's kind of a tough one. Like, well, you you gave me permission,
Yeah.
and hopefully we have relationships, and that's a secular professional world.
Yes.
Man, I would hope our personal relationships, especially with those brothers and sisters, is one that we can do that.
I think we even missed that in the professional world somewhat. I can remember a time when had no idea what was going on at work, and then I got a mid-year review, and it was awful, and everything was terrible. Like, Jason, you need to do this, and you need to do that more. And I said, well, where did this come from? This is kind of out of nowhere. Like, I would have loved it if you just told me up front that you were starting to see this pattern, so I could have worked towards not going down this road.
Yeah.
And it was in your face, and just boom. And I got very offended, very upset about it. And I would argue that you could bring this into the workplace too. Of permission to speak freely. Let's be honest. I'm giving you permission to tell me if I am not doing the job I'm supposed to be doing, so that A, I can either get better, or B, you can just say you warned me and it's time to move on.
Yeah, I guess Peter had a lot of that, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Permission to speak freely, Lord.
Yeah.
Well,
He's the guy that put his foot in his
I'm
mouth.
not going to fail you. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. I'm really not.
Three times.
3 times, you loser. Yes, you
Exactly.
are.
We're talking to Brock Huard here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I want to talk about parenting a little bit with you. You're the dad of 3 kids, 2 girls, a high schooler, a middle schooler, and your boy is in elementary age. You became a dad after your playing career ended, correct? Tell me about being a dad. Not just what it means to you, but sort of what that has done to you as a man.
Humbled. Yeah, there's no doubt. Just as marriage does.
Yeah.
Right? Just as I say to a lot of these 20-somethings in this crazy media world, and even 30-somethings that aren't married, and they're just grinding, and they're working all these hours and all this. I'm not going to get married. I want to get this settled. I want to do... you find somebody that you're willing to die for. There's nothing harder, and there's nothing more humbling, and there's at times nothing more challenging, but there's nothing more growing and more rich in the way that God designed it than to just die to yourself. And parenting is going to be the same way. We're just getting into it. We've been our kids have gone through, with my work, it's provided the opportunity to have a small Christian school that has cultivated a lot of their both education and their faith and their relationships. But it's a small school, and my oldest daughter, on her decision, said, I think I'm ready to spread my wings a little bit. And we've gone into the big public school.
Oh, wow.
It's opened a lot of conversations and a lot of doors that if it wasn't going to be in high school, it was going to be in college. That those doors will open, whether it's at 18 or in this case, almost 15.
Yeah.
And culture is going to bombard and is bombarding. And we spend, I think, Jason, if you were to calculate the hour that we spend on that Wednesday at 5:30 over all these years, I would say, I don't know, 60% is on parenting and 30% is on marriage, right?
Wow.
Maybe 10% is our professional lives.
Yeah.
Right? It's just or maybe it's 60. Now that we're all getting teenagers, it's getting closer to that. Maybe early it was 60% marriage and 30% parenting, and maybe that's going back and forth.
Reversed,
but, yeah, man, we're right in it. And don't you dare ask me for any answers, because all I know is I got to get on my knees. But you do have to be authentic.
Yeah,
you can't close the door, and you can't have the doors closed. I don't know if we'll ever take the door off the hinge. I know some of my friends have had to do that in some of their kids and relationships, I want that door to be just open in any real authentic hardship. And there's going to be failure. There is. Just as I failed and you failed, there is going to be failure.
Isn't that the hardest part, though,
Yes.
as a dad? Because for me, I want to let my daughter fail, but I also want to tell her, this is not what you should do. You should do this. And it's almost, there's a balance between discipline, between teaching, and between getting upset or angry over things that they might be doing wrong. It's just a struggle. I'm shaking my head looking at you, thinking about it right now. It's a struggle. I mean, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I have expressed this, and I will continue to, and I know the world thinks this is bizarre and crazy and weird, and I get called weird a lot by the secular world, and that's okay. So do you.
We're supposed to
yes,
be. Yeah.
But, I have said to my oldest, and I'll say to my middle, and, to Titus too, and my son in a different way, that my job is I feel like this is what the Lord has put on my heart. My job is to protect your heart and your purity. And I'm going to do all I can for that.
Yeah. That's hard in a world that is so, even in your daughter's world where she's now in public school, and I think about my daughter, and she comes home and she's like, Dad, they're writing things on the wall. Dad, you don't let me watch shows that my friends are watching. Dad, they're calling me innocent. They're calling me these words that I just, it makes me cringe, and it saddens me, but at the same time, I'm kind of cheering inside. Yeah. Is that weird to think that way? No. Because it's like, good, I want you to be different.
Yep. Yes.
I don't want you to be conformed to the pattern of this world. I want you to be
set apart. And my wife had a beautiful kind of word picture of this pretty recently. And she said, and they've all, said a salvation prayer. They all three of my kids have done that.
Yes.
And they desire and they seek in their own ways. And my wife said, in this battle with culture that our teenagers are going to be in, there are going to be some rough waters. I just want our kids to hold on to the oars.
Yeah.
I just want them to keep rowing.
Like it's a beautiful,
PJ
beautiful
Fleck,
portrait.
Right?
Yeah.
Row the boat, but I just want them to keep rowing because the storms are coming. The storms will absolutely come, and sometimes they're going to flood the boat, and sometimes it's going to go the wrong way. And just like I think in all of our lives, if we're honest and real and vulnerable and authentic, but just hold on to the oars. Just don't give up, right? Yeah. Just don't get thrown overboard by culture and just swamped and overwhelmed because there's so much pain, so much pain and heartache if you do.
Absolutely. It's good stuff. We're talking to Brock Huard here in the Sports Spectrum podcast. Let's end it with this. We did this with one other guest, and I really liked the way it went, so I want to do it with you, try it with you. So this is a little thing we call one movie, one song, one book.
Oh, boy.
So you got all the time in the world. It's a podcast. But let's do one movie, the most important movie you've ever seen. And I say important, maybe not the best movie, maybe not the movie that you watch over and over and can quote, but maybe the most important movie that you've ever seen. And we can edit all this out, so take your time.
Oh, that is funny. Gosh, Yeah, I mean, Braveheart was such a cool movie for me, like my high school and college years, and in my pro, that was like when I was playing, I was going through battles, and man, I just wanted to be a warrior for my teammates in college.
So that's the movie you put on and inspired you to get
that
out
was
there
a
and do
movie
battle.
just like if William Wallace could do this, look at what he did, and right, and it just I think in my kind of years, that was probably like 17 to 23 from a movie standpoint. It would be one of those. Okay. What the other funny one that comes to mind though is Rocky IV.
I was going to say the same one for me.
Rocky IV?
Rocky IV.
Are you serious?
I would put on the Rocky IV training montage
come on.
when he was in Russia.
Yes.
And this is 8th grade for me, and I would listen to that music or watch that scene, and then I'd go out and try to play
1,000%.
8th grade basketball.
I've only done that 1,000 times. I've only done that 1,000 times in my life.
Rocky IV.
And then, you know what? After I got drafted, they did this photo shoot for these football cards.
Yeah.
And they had this video game contest. And I ended up winning. I wasn't even a good video game player, but this game we played had a glitch in it. It was they knew they couldn't play whatever the popular one was because everyone did it. So they tried to make it a level playing field, and it was like NFL quarterback club or some goofy one. Yeah. And it had a glitch in it. And my landlord in college, his son played it. So I knew this glitch. Like it was an unstoppable play. It was like in Tecmo Bowl. It was an unstoppable play.
The Lawrence Taylor play.
And
Bo Jackson play.
Yes. And I knew this glitch. And I only pulled it out when I really had to. And I ended up winning. I ended up winning a 1-year lease on a BMW. Wow. I would have never bought it, whatever, but I won a 1-year lease. And to that point, not only the training montage, but when Rocky gets in the car before he goes to Russia, right?
Easy way out.
No easy way out. I remember getting in my BMW that I got and I picked up, and there's a freeway you can drive pretty fast, and it was at night, and I'm like, I'm going to go Rocky Balboa right here, man. I'm going to play no easy way out. And I stepped on the gas, and I'm just jamming. So, that one has some funny memories.
I remember, too, he had the word...
What a dork I was.
Oh, we were all dorks. He had Southpaw on his license plate. You remember that? I mean, that's how bad it was. That's how crazy we were as kids. All right, let's move to songs. Right. So one song that has maybe had an impact on you in your life, or it might be a song right now, maybe a Christian song or some kind of musical influence that's had an impact.
Probably just Give Me Jesus. Yeah. I would say that one through college, pros now, and there have been some really neat, I could think of Billy Graham's wife at her service. I'll play that. I probably play that once a month I don't know why, this goes way back, Jason, but, I watched the 700 Club.
Yeah.
I was talking to my older brother about this just very recently. He's like, "You did? I don't even remember." I'm like, "Yeah." I don't know why, because I was called, because Christ called. He had a call on my life, and was knocking at a very early age. And that song is just, it still strikes me. And if you played it right now, I'd probably break it down into years. But just give me that. When all is said and done, just give me Jesus.
I mean, honestly, is that not the motto that we should be all living by, right? Just give me Jesus. How about a book? I know you do a lot of reading. One book that you've read that has had maybe a lasting impression, other than the Bible, of course, but something that, or maybe something that you've read recently that you're like, man, I want to recommend that book.
Yeah, that's a good question. Bill McCartney wrote a book From Ashes to Glory. I'll give you one little story, and then I'll give you another one.
Please.
And when I was in high school, I told you about Bethany Baptist. Well, the pastor had come from Boulder, Colorado, and had a relationship with Bill McCartney. And
he, of course, the former coach for Colorado.
Coach of Colorado,
yes.
And Promise Keepers, the founder of Promise Keepers.
Absolutely.
And my youth pastor, through that relationship, would give me this book, From Ashes to Glory. And I read that as a senior. And Bill McCartney called me one time in the recruiting process. He called me one time.
Wow.
Rick Neuheisel was his coordinator, and he called me a few times when I was being recruited. But Bill called me like on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night one time, and I had just finished his book. And I honestly said to him, and it was totally the Lord, and it was totally a divine appointment, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this ministry thing and keep coaching? And then I got on the plane for the first time in my life on my first recruiting trip to Pitt. Johnny Majors was going to resurrect Pitt. Ken Karcher, the coordinator, was a believer, loved him, went out on this recruiting trip. I got to my hotel room, and Bill McCartney resigned. Resigned from Colorado.
Wow.
And that was days after I had that conversation with him about that book that had been given to me. Otherwise, I would never have had that divine appointment to ask him that question. Wow. So from a book standpoint, that one was, pretty telling way back when.
That's powerful. All right. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And we always end our podcast with this specific question. And it's always an easy question for me to ask. It's not always an easy answer for a lot of people. But for you, Brock Huard, in regards to your relationship with Christ, what are you learning from him right now? What are you learning from the Lord right now?
Yeah, to get on my knees and cry out to him. Really. I mean, that's no different, but to really do it and to pray with your wife and kids.
I don't think that's enough. I'm guilty of not doing enough of that.
We did it when we were young.
Yeah.
When we tucked our kids in, when they were 6 and 7, I sure seemed to be easier with Titus at 8 than it is with Haley at almost 15, and it shouldn't be. And it shouldn't be. Like, we should be able to pray with our wife and kids. It's been the biggest stumbling block. I think the enemy, it is one of his areas he loves to attack. If you look at that little chart I was telling you about that my men's group does, we have gone round and round. We have had a fine jar, like some have with a cuss jar, right? We've had a fine jar for like just trying to go a week straight of praying with our wives. Or a month straight of praying with our wives. And it is amazing the amount of attack on that. Because the enemy doesn't want us to be hand in hand, on our knees. Just doesn't want that partnership. He wants to divide. He wants to distract. He wants to separate. And
why do we struggle with that, Brock? Because I struggle with that. My daughter, I was in her room every single night until age 10 or 11. Then she becomes a sixth grader, a middle schooler, and for some reason it just starts to drift.
Yep.
It's a slow fade, as the song goes, right? And then all of a sudden now I can't tell you the last time at night when I've gone in and prayed with her. We try to pray at different points, but like that time was so precious, and now I feel like it's gone.
Because that's what the enemy would really like to do. Like, just the same thing he wants to do in our relationships. He doesn't want us to be like-minded in that way. He just doesn't. And one of the beautiful, and I'll leave you with this, one of the beautiful, again, pictures, and I don't think I've ever even shared this story, is 2 of my men in the men's group. They're a little more volatile. They have those roots, theirs go a little deeper than the 4 of us. It started beforehand, and they have shared some really intense stuff. And one time it got real hard. And they literally at the table like lean into each other, and we're gonna hug, and I'm like I'm gonna fight for you. Like, I'm gonna fight for this. And having the willingness to do that, man, and to continue to get on our knees and fight for our relationships that really matter.
It is. We are in a war. Let's put it that way. We're in a battle every single day. He is Brock Huard, ESPN football analyst. I say football because he's done college and NFL. Host of Brock and Salk on 710 ESPN in Seattle. And we didn't even get a chance to talk about Above and Beyond, your podcast, my friend. But real quickly, your podcast it was sort of done by seasons. Yeah. So your first season just finished. And I recommend highly that everybody who's listening to this podcast go to iTunes, go to wherever you can listen to podcasts, and listen to Above and Beyond. It is awesome, really well done, and it's just like this, the intersection of sports and faith. But how about season 2? I know it's coming. Yep. How's that going along real quick?
Well, I'm not good enough nor talented enough to do them every week like you do. I have just marveled from afar at this. For you, at the doors that have opened for you, Jason, in this.
Thank you.
And yeah, seriously, and for Sports Spectrum and the platform you guys have, and it shows the need. And I love that over 100,000 people have downloaded your podcast. It's just been awesome.
Yeah.
But seriously, and I say to my to the producer, James, boy howdy's his nickname, I said to him, man, we look at yours every week. And like, gosh, this is amazing. Like, we did 15 of them, and it was like, oh, it was so much work to do 15
for
hard. The doors to open. So, just bless your heart, man, and keep it going, and be praying for you in this opportunity. Our season 2 will begin after the draft. That's when we did last year. We do about 15 is kind of what we can crank out.
After the season's over.
After the season's over, season. and we'll kind of just see what doors open or close. And it's been amazing to see that. It's been transformative because there have been some doors that have been knocking on, like, come on. And like, no. That door's not to open yet, and when it will, it will.
Yes.
And I know that you have walked that yourself. So keep doing what you're doing. I can't believe we're already done.
I know
that went way too fast.
It's a whole hour here.
So,
this has been great.
It hasn't been an hour, has it?
Yeah, 1 hour.
Gosh.
Yeah, man.
Oh, so we'll have to do this again. You'll have to do it on mine.
I will come on your show. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jason.
And we do thank ESPN football analyst, former NFL quarterback Brock Huard for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. A little behind the scenes, too. When we started taping this interview, and we were in a little tiny hotel room in Bristol, Connecticut, across the street from ESPN, and before we started, Brock wanted to pray. And I know that sounds sort of cliche as a Christian. Oh, let's just pray before everything. But it really set the tone and the mood for the interview and set our hearts in the right place. And I can't recommend enough as you guys go about your daily lives, whether it's just going to work or getting ready for a big event or church or something, to really just close your eyes for a minute or two and just thank God and just give it to Him. Whatever you're doing, just give it to Jesus and let Him be in control. And I think what that does is it really prepares our hearts to receive whatever comes our way, good or bad, knowing that we have placed it in the hands of our Savior, Jesus Christ. We thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. You can reach us on Twitter at sports_spectrum, as well as Instagram at sports_spectrum. We also have content on our Facebook page. Just search Sports Spectrum. And every single podcast that we produce, that we post, is available on our YouTube channel now. So you can go to YouTube, just search Sports Spectrum. You'll see the logo and subscribe there and never miss all of the content. It's not just our podcast that we put on YouTube, but we have a lot of cool videos and testimonials, and even some video of the podcast that we've taped will be on there, including this interview that we just did with Brock Huard. So check it out over at our YouTube page. You can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com, with any ideas, comments, guest thoughts, maybe it's a prayer request or some encouragement. Whatever you want to do, feel free to email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. Love to hear from you. Love to hear stories of how these interviews have impacted you, or just what you think, or just how you're doing. So please feel free to reach out. And as always, leave a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes, Apple Podcasts, click the review button, and then just leave a review. 5-star review would be wonderful. But anything you think about the podcast, please leave a review. It helps get the word out. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone listening to this podcast. We hope you have a great holiday time off. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Lots of great things happening with Sports Spectrum. Hope everything is going well with you, and hope you enjoy time with friends and family. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast.